I once had a boss who told me I was going to get fired one day. Those were her exact words. In fact, she said, "You're going to get fired one day. It happens to everyone at least once in their career." What do you say to that? Thanks for the heads up. Looking forward to it. Or how about, we'll see about that. That was me, the third one. It was my gut reaction. What I heard that day wasn't a warning, but a challenge. She was telling me I was going to fail, and to me, that meant an opportunity to prove her wrong. I also heard the voice of my mother. Growing up, to keep us safe, she would be the one to tell me, "You can't do that," or "Don't do that." "Don't jump on the neighbor's trampoline," she would yell across the lawn as I was mid-trip. Or, "You can't stay out late, Missy," after I was caught sneaking out after curfew. I was that kid. And my mother never missed an opportunity to tell me that there were just certain things that I can't and shouldn't do. I heard her, but she couldn't always stop me because I loved to prove her wrong. Sorry, Mom. But that's not the only thing she said. For all the times my mom told me, "Can't," or "Don't," or "Be careful," she also told me the opposite, to go for it, to take a chance, to remember that there were things that I could do anything I wanted to as long as I put my mind to it. And that stuck. So it shouldn't have been that big of a surprise when that early boss told me one day I'd get fired, and it happens to everyone, and I'm just like everyone, that my gut instinct, my reaction, was to want to prove her wrong. I had the same reaction 15 years later when I did get fired. Now this was a different boss in a different office. I was working in a male-dominated space, and it came out of the blue. My boss called me into his office one day, and I was fired. And I remember thinking, wow, this is actually finally happening. That early boss, she was right. Don't tell her I told you. And after I sat there for what felt like an eternal minute in total shock, I managed to ask 2 questions. The first was, why? His reason? My performance wasn't meeting expectations. Now, I knew this wasn't true. I hadn't received a single piece of negative feedback about any aspect of my performance up until this point. After 6 weeks of working there, and I had asked. It was important for me to know my status because the firm was going through a hiring freeze, and I was transitioning into a new role. One that I had been proactively recruited into, by the way, because I had a great track record at this company. And up until this point, I was told that I was doing great. And more than that, I knew I was doing great. So here I am, being fired for my performance not meeting expectations. It didn't make any sense. And I was about to say that to him when suddenly it dawned on me. 3 days earlier, I had let it slip to my boss's right-hand woman that I was pregnant. She had just told me that she was pregnant. And when I asked her her due date, and she told me that it was the exact same day as mine, what are the odds? I couldn't help but share my exciting news that I was also expecting. Have you ever had one of those moments when as soon as the words leave your mouth, you just want to reach out and take them back? Yeah, that was me. Immediate regret. Because I feared this exact scenario. And I thought, she must have told him. So my second question was, did you know I was pregnant? No, he said. Just like that. Way too quickly. In other words, yes. For the first time in my career, I felt like a victim. And I'm not the first. Women working in male-dominated spaces are all all too often made to feel disempowered, like they have less power than they do. It's a mindset that's rooted in the patriarchal structures that have shaped our world for centuries and continue to do so today. It seems like no matter what we do, we're just going to get smacked in the face by these invisible, hard to pinpoint biases. The ones that are behind are getting paid less, or overlooked for promotions, or straight up fired. It's this system that perpetuates the you can'ts we hear in our lives. I left that office that day totally blindsided and not sure what to do next. At first, I found myself grappling with the notion of injustice. My instinct to want to say, we'll see about that, was kicking in. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to stand up for my rights, not just my rights, but the rights of all women. On top of that, my plan for starting my own business before leaving the comfort of a steady paycheck was now being jeopardized. So I felt, if I don't fight back, not only am I going to be letting down all women, but I'm also going to be losing my safety net, my ability to start a business with less risk. Well, what could I do? This is when my internal battle ensued. It sounded like this. Well, I could lawyer up, and that's what a lot of people wanted me to do. But I've loved working at this company and all the relationships that I've built up until this point. I don't want to go out like that. I could always go back to my old job. They really liked me there, but that job was a lot more challenging, and I don't know. That would leave me with less bandwidth to start a business on the side. I could just accept my boss's decision and leave, but would that make me complicit in this system? What do I really want? What would be right for me? What if I did that? What was right for me? What if that was the best thing that I could do for myself and for all women? If you're a woman, this internal battle might happen to you more than once in your life. In a world where we're offered unsolicited advice, urging us to be more of this or less of that, we need to stop giving our power away to other voices and instead cultivate our own voice. When we value our individual strengths and passions, others will too. Because it's not about how loud we yell. It's about the strength in our voice that truly counts. Let's be clear. The gender gap exists, and it persists. Despite the fact that we make up the majority of the workforce, just over a third of women hold senior leadership positions. Despite the fact that companies with female CEOs are 30% more likely to outperform other companies, just 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. Despite years of trying to change the system, for every dollar a man makes, a woman earns 82 cents. And yes, the maternal wall is real, and it's still holding women back. There's a mountain of research that proves that mothers experience higher levels of discrimination across different employment settings. Discrimination that's both overt, like pay, hiring, and promotion, and discrimination that's covert, instances of hostility, instability, and moments like the one I experienced that day when I was convinced that I was being fired for being pregnant. This is the gap. This is its size and shape. And the question is not, do we mind the gap? We should all mind the gap. But what to do about it? Do we pour our precious energy into fighting back against it, only to fall into it? Do we try to jump over it? Do we pretend it's not there? The most effective way to dismantle and reshape the system is to make the difficult but powerful decision to stop listening to the endlessly contradictory voices around us saying can't or don't, and instead cultivate an inner voice so strong, one that gives us permission to make bold, decisive, and yes, sometimes risky actions. This means valuing what makes us different. We need to leverage our unique perspectives and stop waiting for the system to change, but be the catalysts for that change ourselves. You can start to do this by deciding to focus on what's within your control. Because what you focus on, you will find. And I know this because in our brains it's called the reticular activating system. If you're, for example, walking down the street and you're telling yourself, don't trip, don't trip, don't trip, you're actually telling your brain to trip because your reticular activating system is focusing on the word trip. It doesn't hear the word don't. So if you focus on things that you can't control, like getting fired or being treated unfairly, you'll find yourself in a disempowered state. If you focus on things you can control, like your inner voice, or what role you want to play, or who you want to be, you'll find that you have more power than you thought you did. And that power resides in the choices that we make in response to those challenges that we face. Once you decide to focus on what is within your control, use it to define your own path. Forget about societal expectations. Forget about those preconceived definitions of success. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, but hear me out. This is about embracing the idea that you are the author of your own story. And so you get to define its meaning. Isn't that cool? In other words, if you're going to tell yourself a story, it might as well be a good one, right? Finally, and maybe most crucially, dare. Dare to cut away those safety nets. Dare to let go of expectations of how it's supposed to be. Embrace risk as a necessary part of growth. And know that true progress means stepping outside of your comfort zone. Now, that doesn't always mean fighting back or giving up. But it does mean that we have to admit that certainty is an illusion. And searching for it is only going to slow us down and maybe even prevent us from reaching our goals. For me, it was that moment of being fired that was a turning point. I decided that it was a moment for me to reassess my priorities, to really decide, who do I want to be? Instead of fighting back against the system, despite feeling wronged and angry and getting a lot of pressure to do it, I decided that to truly fight back, I didn't have to do it the way that others might expect. I could do it by cultivating my inner voice and using it to help myself others rise as leaders and change agents. I decided to focus on that. And I defined that moment of being fired in my life not as a moment of being victimized, but as my moment to be my own hero. So I ask you today, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you define success? And what steps are you willing to take to achieve it? The path to dismantling the patriarchal structures that limit us begins with embracing our own individual power and challenging those voices around us. Let's not be deterred by the gaps that we face, but let's use them to propel us forward and over them toward an equitable future. This is how we change the system. Thank you.